You know that kind of person who hears the word no and takes it as a personal attack? The kind who thinks intimidation is the same thing as negotiation. 8 years ago, I met one of those people. All I wanted was to sell an old, beat-up car for $1,000. Instead, I accidentally exposed a man whose entire life was built on threats, lies, and avoiding responsibility. And when he decided to drag my child into his twisted anger, he unknowingly triggered a chain reaction that ended with handcuffs, a seized luxury car, felony charges, and a prison sentence. And the craziest part, I didn't plan any revenge. I didn't even raise my voice. I just let him keep talking until the system finally listened. If you've ever been underestimated, disrespected, or treated like you should know your place, stay with me. And if you believe bullies eventually meet consequences, hit that like button, subscribe, and brace yourself, because this story proves karma doesn't miss. It just waits. 8 years ago, my life felt like controlled chaos. I was in college, raising my young son, and juggling a work schedule that flipped my sleep cycle upside down. I told most people I worked swing shifts and midnights because explaining college life felt exhausting. Money wasn't catastrophic, but it was tight enough that every dollar mattered. That's why I decided to sell my old car. It wasn't pretty. The paint was peeling. The engine lights stayed on like a warning sign. The AC barely worked, and the fuel system needed attention. I wasn't hiding any of that. I listed everything honestly. Even included the estimated repair costs from my trusted mechanic. No tricks, no exaggeration, no surprises. I posted the ad on a local sales site I trusted. Clean photos, straightforward description, and one clear instruction at the bottom. I work weird hours. Please text only. That detail would matter more than I realized. For the first few days, everything was normal. A few people asking questions, a few lowball offers I ignored. Then one evening, my phone buzzed with a text that seemed harmless enough. "Hi, I'm Matt. Is your car still for sale?" Simple, polite, normal. I replied that it was, and we started exchanging basic information: price, condition, why the engine light was on, where I got the quote. I answered calmly, professionally, like someone who'd sold things online before and knew how this usually went. Then, without warning, the tone changed. The next day, I received a text that made my stomach tighten instantly. "Are you going to take all your SH*T out of the car before you sell it to me, or is that my job?" I stared at my phone in disbelief. No greeting, no joke, no respect. Just entitlement, like the sale was already decided, like the car already belonged to him, like I owed him something. The irony. The junk he was complaining about was 3 college textbooks and a gym bag with spare clothes. 4 items. That was it. Something clicked in my head, not anger, awareness. This wasn't someone I wanted to deal with. Luckily, I didn't have to. Other buyers were already lining up test drives. People who understood basic human decency, so I responded calmly and firmly, without emotion or explanation. "I'm not selling the car to you, so don't worry about it." That should have ended the interaction. Any reasonable person would have moved on. Matt was not a reasonable person. Almost immediately, my phone started lighting up. He criticized the peeling paint, clearly visible in the photos. He mocked a price, calling the car a piece of garbage not worth $1,000. He accused me of wasting his time. He demanded justification, as if my decision required his approval. For a short time, I tried to disengage politely, reminding him he wasn't the only interested buyer, and that the decision was final. That's when the conversation stopped being about the car altogether. That's when it became personal. The sales site allowed listings to connect directly to Facebook. Back then, Facebook still felt safe, trustworthy. I hadn't locked down my privacy settings. I didn't think I needed to. I was wrong. He found my profile, my photos, my family, my son, and suddenly, the texts turned vicious. He commented on my body, calling himself muscular, while sending a photo that proved the opposite. A thin man trying to intimidate through words alone? He asked if I even understood cars, or if I'd written the listing while on my period. He told me I should be grateful I was married, because otherwise he'd come to my house and show me how a real man handles a little b*tc. My hands shook reading that message. Not fear, rage, cold, protective rage. But what came next made my blood run ice cold. Because the next messages weren't about me anymore. They were about my child. And the moment I saw my son mentioned on my screen, something deep inside me snapped into focus. Every instinct screamed the same warning. This man didn't just cross a line. He erased it. And without knowing it, he had just aimed his entire life directly into the path of consequences he could never outrun. The moment I saw my son's name appear in those messages, something inside me changed permanently. Up until that point, I had been annoyed, insulted, and angry. But now I was terrified in a way only a parent understands. My chest tightened, my breathing turned shallow, and my hands began to shake so badly I almost dropped my phone. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This wasn't some angry man throwing insults because he didn't get his way. This was someone who had taken the time to search my life, scroll through my photos, analyze my family, and then deliberately aim his cruelty at the most vulnerable part of me. He mocked my child's appearance, calling him ugly, saying no woman would ever love him. He accused me of being abusive because there was a bit of dirt on my son's face in a zoo photo. He twisted innocent memories into weapons. Each sentence felt calculated, like he wanted to see how far he could push me before I broke. And then came the messages that made my blood run cold. The ones filled with threats and implications, so disturbing that my brain tried to reject them entirely. This man wasn't just angry, he was unhinged. I was on my college campus when I finally read everything. I usually kept my phone turned off during class because if I didn't, I'd never focus. And that meant I often saw hours worth of messages all at once. That day, when I turned my phone back on, it felt like opening a door to hell. Message after message after message, each one worse than the last. I remember standing there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My thoughts weren't organized. They weren't logical. They were raw instinct. Protect. Stop this. Make it end. Without even realizing how loud I was, the words came out of my mouth. Oh hell no. There was no fear in my voice anymore. Just fury. Apparently, I said it loud enough that my boss heard me from across the room. She walked over immediately, concern written all over her face, and asked me what was wrong. I hesitated for a split second, embarrassed and overwhelmed, then handed her my phone. I told her everything in a rush, that a man who tried to buy my car wouldn't take no for an answer, that he found my Facebook, that he was now sending me abusive messages and talking about my child. I told her I was about to delete everything and block him because I couldn't take it anymore. She stopped me instantly. No, she said, firmly but calmly. Do not delete anything. Let me see. She read the messages silently. I watched her face change as she scrolled. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes hardened. The room felt different, heavier, like the air itself had shifted. She looked up at me and told me to wait for a moment. She cleared the lobby so no one else could hear or see what was happening. Then asked me to follow her. We walked past doors I had never gone through before. Security doors. Restricted areas. Places I didn't even know existed inside the building. I didn't know what was happening, but I trusted her completely. She brought me into her office, sat down at her computer, and began cross-referencing information while occasionally checking my phone. She asked me if I had anything besides the number, a last name, an address, anything. I told her all I had was a first name, and I showed her the text where he introduced himself. She nodded and kept typing. Minutes passed. Long, uncomfortable minutes. I sat there replaying the messages in my head, wondering if I'd done something wrong by posting that car ad, by not locking down my Facebook, by trusting strangers to act like adults. Finally, she handed my phone back to me. She told me not to respond, not to block him yet, not to engage at all. She said she had everything she needed. If he contacted me again, I was to save every message. If things escalated further, I was to call her or 911 immediately. Her voice was calm, confident, controlled. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't speculating. She knew exactly what she was doing. What I didn't know at the time was who she really was. I thought she was just an administrator, a supervisor, someone who handled schedules and paperwork. I didn't know she was a full lieutenant in the local police department. I didn't know she had spent years working patrol, then moved into investigating child, elder, and disabled abuse cases. I didn't know that threatening a child was the one thing guaranteed to flip every switch she had. I left that day feeling shaken but strangely safe, like something invisible had wrapped itself around the situation and taken control. I went back to class. I focused on my life. I sold the car to someone else for the full asking price and pushed the whole nightmare to the back of my mind. 2 weeks later, when I returned to sign my next time card, my boss asked me to wait again. She told me there was a document she needed me to sign related to what happened. My stomach dropped. Every ugly message came flooding back at once. She must have seen the panic on my face. Because she told me not to worry. She said she'd explain everything after I signed. So I did. And that's when I learned that while I'd been living my normal life, karma had been very, very busy. For the next 2 weeks, I went back to living my life, but something about the situation never fully left my mind. I followed my boss's instructions exactly. I didn't respond to the man. I didn't block his number. I filtered his messages so they wouldn't pop up on my screen, because seeing his name alone made my stomach twist. I focused on my classes, my job, and my son. Eventually, I sold the car to another buyer for the full asking price, handed over the keys, and felt a sense of closure I desperately needed. I honestly thought the nightmare was over, that the man had finally moved on to terrorize someone else, and that this entire episode would fade into an unpleasant memory I'd tell someday as a cautionary tale about online selling. 2 weeks later, I returned to the police department office to sign my time card. Just like I did every pay period, everything felt normal until my boss looked up from her desk and told me to wait. That she needed me to sign one more document? The tone of her voice was calm, but serious, and instantly my chest tightened. All the messages, all the threats, all the fear I had shoved down rushed back to the surface at once. I followed her back to her office, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios, wondering if he had escalated, if he had tried to find me again, if something had gone wrong. She sat down, pulled up a file, and slid a document across the desk toward me. She told me it was an actionable complaint connected to what had happened 2 weeks earlier. I must have gone pale, because she immediately told me not to worry and assured me that she would explain everything after I signed. My hands shook slightly as I picked up the pen. I signed where she indicated, still not fully understanding what I was agreeing to, only knowing that she wouldn't steer me wrong. Once the paperwork was complete, she leaned back in her chair and finally told me the truth. She explained that the phone number he had been using was connected to a low-cost provider, often used by people trying to avoid long-term records. That alone raised flags. But combined with the first name he gave me, She had been able to dig deeper. A driver's license search led to an address. That address led to prior police reports. And those reports opened a door to something far bigger than a man harassing a woman over a used car. What she found was a history of domestic violence complaints and a pattern of behavior that looked disturbingly familiar. As she continued explaining, my shock turned into disbelief. The man had 5 children with 4 different women. He was massively behind on child support. Not by a few missed payments, but by tens of thousands of dollars, according to the records. He hadn't paid consistently in over a decade. The total owed was somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. While his children went without, he had been actively avoiding garnishment, bouncing between jobs, and using every trick he could to stay off the radar. Then came the detail that made my boss shake her head. Just 2 weeks earlier, the same man had requested a title transfer for a high-end car, not a beater, not a project vehicle, a flashy, expensive car that came with massive insurance, premiums, and screamed disposable income. That single purchase changed everything. Because his arrears were so severe, the law allowed for immediate action. A seizure order was placed on the vehicle, meaning the car could be taken and sold to pay down his unpaid child support. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who tried to bully me over a $1,000 car had just exposed himself while buying something far more expensive. But karma wasn't done. One of the mothers of his children lived in a state where fleeing child support obligations could result in an active arrest warrant. When my boss contacted authorities in that state and asked if they wanted to execute it, their response was immediate and enthusiastic. They said yes, and they wanted him picked up as soon as possible. The phrase she used stuck with me because of how casually devastating it sounded. Yes, with much haste. As if that wasn't enough, the investigation kept unraveling. My boss discovered that he had been using his brother's Social Security number on employment paperwork to avoid wage garnishment. It wasn't a loophole. It was fraud. Serious fraud. She notified his employer, who confirmed that submitting false documents was grounds for immediate termination. Just like that, the job he relied on disappeared. No warnings. No negotiations. No second chances. Then she told me the final part. The part that made my entire body go cold. 4 days earlier, she had personally executed the arrest warrant. He had been taken into custody for felony child abandonment. The state seeking him was already on the way to pick him up. He was facing 8 to 12 years in prison, and even incarceration wouldn't erase his debt. He would still owe every dollar of child support he had avoided for years. As she spoke, I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling me. This wasn't petty revenge. This wasn't someone getting embarrassed or inconvenienced. This was a complete collapse. A life built on intimidation and avoidance had finally been forced into the light. And it all started because he couldn't handle the word no. I walked out of that office that day feeling something I hadn't felt since the first message mentioned my child. Relief. Not triumph. Not joy. Relief. Because the system had worked. Because the threats had been taken seriously. Because a man who thought he could terrorize a mother without consequences had been stopped before he could hurt anyone else. And the most chilling realization of all was this. If he had simply walked away when I refused to sell him the car, none of this would have happened. He did this to himself, step by step, message by message, threat by threat. After my boss finished explaining everything, the room went quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. I remember sitting there, staring at the edge of her desk, trying to wrap my mind around how quickly someone's entire life could unravel. Just weeks earlier, this man had been sending me threatening messages, puffing himself up through a phone screen, acting like he was untouchable. Now he was sitting in a holding cell, stripped of his control. His intimidation reduced to paperwork and steel bars. I didn't feel happy in the way people imagine revenge feels. What I felt was something heavier and more grounding. Safety. Finality. The kind of calm that only comes when a threat is permanently removed. My boss looked at me and said something that stuck with me long after that day. She told me that men like him rely on silence. They rely on fear, on embarrassment, on the assumption that women will minimize what's happening and try to handle it alone. She told me that the moment he brought my child into it, he stopped being a nuisance and became a priority. Not because of who I was, but because of who he revealed himself to be. Hearing that made something inside me loosen, like I had been carrying guilt I didn't even realize I was holding. Guilt for not locking down my Facebook sooner. Guilt for engaging with him at all. Guilt for wondering if I had somehow provoked this. In that office, all of that melted away. This wasn't my fault. It never had been. When I left the station that day, the world looked exactly the same, but I didn't feel the same inside it. The sky was the same color. Cars still passed by. People went about their lives without knowing what had just happened. But for me, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't replaying his messages anymore. I wasn't checking my phone with dread. I wasn't imagining worst-case scenarios. The noise in my head had finally gone quiet. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since the harassment began. The kind of sleep where your body finally believes it's safe. Over the next few days, I learned bits and pieces of what happened after his arrest. His luxury car was seized almost immediately, to be sold off and applied directly to his child support debt. The same car he had proudly transferred into his name, the same car he thought proved his success, became evidence of his neglect. His employer terminated him as soon as the fraud investigation was confirmed, cutting off the income stream he had tried so hard to hide. And the state that had been waiting for him didn't hesitate to come get him. Years of unpaid responsibility caught up to him in a matter of days. What struck me most was how small his role in my life had actually been. Despite how massive the consequences were for him, he wasn't someone I knew. He wasn't someone I trusted. He wasn't even someone I had agreed to meet. He was just a stranger who believed he could intimidate a woman into compliance. And when that didn't work, he escalated until the system finally took notice. I didn't ruin his life. I didn't plot or scheme. I didn't seek revenge. All I did was refuse to be bullied and refuse to stay silent once my child was targeted. Everything else followed naturally. As the weeks passed, the emotional weight continued to lift. I found myself laughing more easily, focusing better in class, and feeling present with my son in a way I hadn't been during the height of the harassment. I stopped second-guessing myself. I stopped wondering if I had overreacted. Every now and then, the memory of his messages would resurface. But instead of fear, they now brought clarity. A reminder of how quickly situations can turn dangerous, and how important it is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Eventually, I left that job. Life moved forward, as it always does. But saying goodbye to my boss was harder than I expected. She wasn't just a supervisor. She was the person who stepped in without hesitation, who took me seriously when it mattered most, who used her position not for power, but for protection. When she retired years later, I sent her a large cake as a thank you, not knowing if she'd even remember me. She did. She called me personally to say thank you, and hearing her voice brought everything flooding back. Gratitude, respect, and a quiet understanding between two people who had shared a moment that changed the course of things. Looking back now, the most chilling part of this story isn't what happened to him. It's how easily it could have ended differently if I had deleted those messages, if I had blocked him without reporting, if I had decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Silence would have protected him. Speaking up protected my child. That realization stays with me, and it's one I carry into every interaction, every decision, every moment where my instincts tell me something isn't right. And as satisfying as karma can be, the real victory wasn't seeing him punished. It was knowing that he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he tried to hurt us. When I look back on everything now, years later, what stays with me isn't the shock of what happened to him or even the scale of the consequences he faced. What stays with me is how ordinary the beginning was. A used car, a simple online listing, a polite refusal. That's all it took to expose someone who had spent years surviving by intimidation, manipulation, and silence. People like him don't start as monsters. They become monsters because they learn, over time, that no one stops them, that no one pushes back. That fear works. Until one day, it doesn't. I often think about how easily this could have gone differently. If I had blocked him immediately, if I had deleted the messages out of discomfort or embarrassment, if I had convinced myself I was overreacting, like so many people do when harassment begins creeping into their lives, if I had decided it wasn't worth the hassle, silence would have protected him. Silence would have allowed him to move on to the next target. And the next, and the next. Speaking up didn't just protect me. It protected people I will never meet, including his own children, who finally received justice long overdue. The irony still hits hard. A man who accused me of being ignorant, emotional, and weak ended up exposing his own life through nothing but his own behavior. He tried to bully me over a $1,000 car while hiding tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid child support. He tried to intimidate me through a phone screen. While committing fraud to avoid responsibility, he tried to scare a mother into submission, and instead, awakened a system designed to deal with people exactly like him. There was no mastermind revenge plan here, just accountability, catching up at full speed. What I learned from this experience is something I wish more people understood. You don't need to be powerful to be protected. You don't need to be loud, aggressive, or vengeful. You just need to document, speak up, and trust that the right people exist in the right places. My boss didn't save me because she liked me. She saved me because she took threats seriously, especially when they involved a child. And that made all the difference. I carried guilt for a long time about small things that never should have mattered. My Facebook privacy settings, responding to his messages at all, assuming he would behave like a normal human being. That guilt disappeared once I understood the truth. The responsibility was never mine. The moment he chose to escalate, to stalk, to threaten, he made his own choices. The consequences were his, not mine. If there's one lesson I hope people take from this story, it's this: trust your instincts, especially when something feels wrong. Don't minimize threats. Don't assume someone is just blowing off steam. And never believe that protecting yourself or your family is an overreaction. Silence keeps bullies safe. Documentation holds them accountable. And to anyone watching this who has ever been made to feel small, powerless, or afraid for saying no, remember this: the word no is not an invitation to negotiate. It is a boundary. And anyone who tries to punish you for setting one is telling you exactly who they are. Sometimes karma doesn't come as revenge. Sometimes it comes as consequences. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, emotionally powerful Reddit revenge stories. And tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying moment of karma you've ever witnessed? Because if there's one thing this story proves, it's that eventually, the truth always catches up.